I know, but we're just going to get through like 2 minutes and not stress about it. Yes.
The advice and opinions expressed by the host of Autism Live and her guests are meant solely as suggestion and should not be in any way construed as child-specific advice. The Center for Autism and Related Disorders advises working with a board-certified behavior analyst who has experience with autism before starting any intensive behavioral intervention. Any choices you make in determining your child's treatment are completely at your own discretion.
Good morning and welcome to Autism Live. I'm Shannon Penrod and we're coming to you live from the Warner Center in Woodland Hills, California. This is the home for Autism Live. It is also the home for the Center for Autism and Related Disorders. We're very excited to be here this morning. You know, I love Wednesday, and Wednesday, whenever possible, we bring you Dr. Doreen Grant-Pichet live, and she answers your questions live and in person. And yes, unfortunately, you can already hear it in my voice. I promised you Dr. Grant-Pichet this morning, and she was called away. And so we're going to play you an oldie but a goodie. It's still good stuff. So I don't want you to leave. I want you to check out, and you'll see the questions at the beginning of the show. So you'll see the kinds of things that she's going to be answering. I do want to remind you, I'll be standing by. So I'll see when you guys write in questions in the crawl, and I apologize again that we don't have her live, but it's almost as good when she's recorded. And I also want to give you a couple of programming notes. And please don't forget to, Traven's going to show you some of the different ways that you can connect, and keep in mind that I'll be keeping tabs on those as well so that we can continue having the conversation during the live show. And you can write in questions, and we will save them for the next show that Dr. Doreen Grant-Pichet is going to be on. But I also want to remind you the rest of the shows for this week. So today is the Ask Dr. Doreen. Tomorrow on the show, we had such a good time talking to one of the producers of the film Autism Goes to College. So tomorrow we're having the director, Eric Lindthorst, is going to be here with us to talk about this film and give you guys more ways that you can go and watch it, because we're hearing great things about it all over when people are able to screen it. And then on Friday, Nancy Alspaugh-Jackson and I will be here for Let's Talk Autism with Shannon and Nancy. We have Lee Hirschfeld is going to be with us. She's one of our research associates who explains research in the news to us. So she'll be here for that, and that's always really fun. And then we've got the wonderful autism mom and author Kimberly Kaplan will be with us. She's got a new book out about, of all things, Monty Hall. Do you remember Monty Hall? He used to host Let's Make a Deal and a lot of other shows that are even before my time, but she has co-authored this wonderful new book about Monty Hall. And I know you're thinking, like, what does that really have to do with autism? But you know, first of all, there's always a connection, right? But the connection that's firmest for us is that it's an autism mom who co-authored this. And we always support the work of autism parents, right? Because how could we not? So, and Kimberly's got other books that are written about autism, and a short film that she wrote about autism. So we're going to talk about all of that with her, with Nancy, plus some in the news on Friday. So that's what's happening for the rest of the week. And then we'll tell you on Friday about what's happening next week, because next week's a little bit different. But I hope that you will write in during this hour and stay tuned and watch this really superlative episode of Ask Dr. Doreen. And like I said, I'll be standing standing by answering questions. And so, my friends, enjoy. Here's Ask Dr. Doreen. Welcome to Ask Dr. Doreen. We're here with Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh, and she's going to answer your questions in real time. For those of you who don't know or aren't familiar with Dr. Granpeesheh, she is a true expert in the field of autism. I believe the preeminent expert in the field of autism, and she's also a visionary. We were just talking about this briefly before that. If I had to go to somebody and say, you know, what should I do? What should somebody else do? It would absolutely hands down be you.
Thank you so much.
And you've been doing that for people for many years now, for more than 3 decades, and have helped multiple tens of thousands of people on the autism spectrum to be able to find their way to gain skills, to be able to do things that are meaningful in their lives. And I think that's a huge thing. But you also you take into account everybody's perspective, their perspective, the individual that's on the spectrum, and the family. And I think that that's unique. I wish we could clone you.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Too much chaos in the universe.
No, it'd be fabulous. But in any case, Dr. Granpeesheh is here to answer your questions. She donates this hour to all of us. We do like to give a disclaimer at the beginning that there is no expert in any field, but especially in the field of autism, who could give individual specific advice in this forum. So it does mean that Dr. Granpeesheh will look at your questions and she will give answers of a general nature that will hopefully help you to be able to go to the experts in your area and get more specific answers.
Exactly. We'll do the best we can with the information we have.
But we learn so much at your feet.
Well, thank you so much. But yeah, we just want to make sure people know that sometimes the information in these questions is just not enough for us to be able to give exact direction. So, you know, please be aware of that.
But having said that, as we've said earlier, there's so many different ways to write into the show, but one of the ways, sometimes when you're writing in the live feature, it only gives you a certain number of characters, and you can keep writing in.
Right.
And we mostly can piece together which question goes with which question. But if you need a longer space, you do have the ability to message us on Facebook, and you also have the ability to email me if you want to write a longer letter.
Right.
The first question that we had today came to us, it's a longer one, and we may not read the whole thing, but it came to us as a message on our Facebook page, on Autism Live's Facebook page. So they wrote it in and said, "Dear Shannon and Dr. Doreen, I apologize in advance for how long this email is." And she says, "I'm the mom who wrote in a few weeks ago regarding my 2-year-old and my insurance not covering ABA. She goes on to say, I cried when I heard my question read. I feel so alone in this, and I think we can all relate to that. She says, since my son's diagnosis, I've been living, breathing, and eating information about autism. I watch Autism Live every week and have begun watching older shows from months and even years back. My husband is wonderful and very helpful, but when it comes to trying to figuring out what's the best course of action, it's all on me." And that's a common tale. Mm-hmm. There's even a couple that does a talk, and they say that, you know, one person becomes the project manager and the other person tries to keep the roof over the head, and that's a lot of times how it falls in an autism family.
And that's kind of how it has to be, you know, and it works if each person is able to take a different role. And in this case, when you read on, this mom is a nurse.
Yes.
So it makes sense because she just has more knowledge.
It does make sense. But she goes on to say, doctors are not being very helpful in the sense that I ask about biomedical aspect of autism. I'm met with judgmental looks, and I'm told flat out that those biomedical approaches don't work. He even had severe reflux and a milk protein allergy as an infant. When I asked the GI about the gut-brain connection, he gave me no insight and said kids with autism have GI issues.
Which that just kills me, you know.
Doesn't it? It offends me to my eye teeth.
Not only that doctors would say none of this is true, but the fact that you just say, oh, all kids with autism have GI issues, which has absolutely nothing to do with autism at all.
And unfortunately, then they decide not to treat them as a child child that they would treat who was having
this is
GI
just
issues.
exactly.
This is autism.
This is called overshadowing, and this kind of really concerns me. And it's so important that people don't ignore these other things that are going on with their kids. It's so important.
It's horrifying. Okay, but she goes on to say, when I asked about the gut-brain connection, he gave me no insight, said kids with autism. My son has, and the doctor doesn't believe in detoxing. She says, my son has eczema and keratosis pilaris. I have him on a dairy-free, gluten-free diet. I asked the GI about yeast overgrowth, and he does not believe in that either. I've got words for him. And she says, I have nowhere to turn. Well, fortunately, that's not true. That's the part that's not true. She says, my insurance only covers the pediatric GIs in that office, and it's so frustrating. What helps me a little is that I'm a nurse, and since I ask certain more probative questions, they don't totally disregard me, but I would love to find a physician that sees my son as a whole when it comes to autism. I don't believe I'm going to get an appropriate second opinion in that office. They're not looking at him as a whole. Thank you for answering my question a few weeks ago. You were right. The card I had the appointment for was the card, because to catch people up, in Florida, there are two different cards. One is attached to a university that has nothing to do with the card that we're talking about.
Right. And it's Center for Autism-Related Disabilities, actually. It's a little bit different than the...
Okay. She says, I contacted your card in Boca Raton, Florida, and they were so nice and helpful. I plan on applying for Medicaid, but I was told the card doesn't accept it in Florida yet. Also, I purchased the skills program in the interim to start doing ABA myself at home. In regard to IBT, which program do you recommend, the module for parents or the RBT modules? I apologize for all the questions, but I have one more. He is engaging in head banging. I'm trying to figure out the function of the head banging and stop him from doing it. He's a sensory seeker with all of his senses for the most. He does not avoid any visual, auditory, or tactile input. He bangs the back of his head while in the high chair in the car seat. He starts off soft, but then gradually gets faster and faster. He has, and I'm not sure how to say that, Chiari malformation. However, the neurologist is not concerned about it. It is a 4-millimeter herniation of the cerebellum, and the cerebral tonsils are triangular. I'm afraid that the head banging is going to make the Chiari worse. When I tell him no, he looks right at me and smiles or laughs and continues to do it. I don't believe he bangs his head because of pain. He is very happy and a content kid. He is always smiling, laughing. Sometimes he does laugh inappropriately, which makes me wonder about yeast overgrowth. He also bangs his head when he's mad. He bangs the front of his head when he's mad and not in a chair. Luckily, he doesn't have a texture aversion and will eat anything and everything I give him, which I'm grateful for. But when his meal is done, he will scream and cry and bang his head. I distract him by being silly or singing, and he stops and he doesn't continue to cry for food. So I'm sure he's not still hungry. He also has been mouthing and biting his toys and fingers, and when he drinks water, he holds it in his mouth for a long time before swallowing it. When I tell him to swallow the water, he laughs. All this makes me believe it may be an oral sensory issue, but I'm not sure how to fix it. And thank you so much for your help. You have no idea how much I appreciate it. And we adore you. Right? This is an honest mom.
Yes, absolutely. And I was taking notes because there's so much to tell you.
You have to. We should have had the camera on you because you were furiously scribbling.
I just hope
there's
I
a
don't
lot
forget
there.
anything. Yeah, there's a lot going on, and I'll try not to talk about, just answer this one question the whole show, but I'll do my best here.
Okay.
So a couple of things. First of all, you have found your tribe. We are here. Let me tell you this, what you're experiencing is not unique. In fact, it's probably, I want to say maybe 80% of parents who have had a child with autism have gone through this sort of thing, where their pediatricians or even further GI doctors will kind of mock where we are right now and what we know about autism. I've been in the field of just ABA for almost 40 years, and I, to this day, still hear people saying it is impossible to recover from autism. So, 40 years of work later, and it's still, the first publication we had on the subject of recovery was 1987. So we're talking, it takes a really long time and many, many years for things to settle down. On the issue of biology of autism, I think either on our show or somewhere online, there's got to be some presentations that I've done in the past. I've talked a lot about this concept because for me, and this might be interesting for other people listening as well, but the way that I see autism is definitely, and you refer to whole child, and maybe you've seen some of my presentations that were called the Autism, the Whole Child. And really what we're talking about is, from my perspective, there's no question, we know already that in some cases at least, there's a genetic predisposition, but that genetic predisposition, what it really affects in the children, the biology underlying what we see with our kids, is very often related to what's going on in their immune system, which means also related to the GI tract, of course. And there is, when children have inflammation in their GI tract, which sounds like your child does, due to perhaps these allergens or perhaps something else, we don't know yet, there's no question that his immune system is not functioning the way it should be. A lot of our kids react to toxins very differently. A lot of our children have severe redox issues, and I would really recommend that you do continue to pursue the medical issues, because we look at this just the example you gave where your child has gastrointestinal problems and the doctors are saying, oh, this is just about the autism. If it was any other child, as Shannon said, and they had bloating, if they had diarrhea, constipation, just gastrointestinal pain, whatever it was, everyone would take that seriously. We would definitely be treating that child. With our kids, somehow the doctors are like, oh, that's just part of autism. It is such an ignorant statement to say that's part of autism. It has absolutely nothing to do with the diagnosis of autism. And we're just ignoring the fact that there's a high correlation with children who have autism, who also have, and it's so high that it might even be causative, and people are not willing to look at it. So it's amazing. You're doing the right thing in regards to the diet. I do recommend, so here's 2 doctors that you can contact. I believe you're in Florida.
Yes.
And I don't know which side of Florida you're on, but in the Miami southeastern section of Florida, so in the Miami area, a very good friend of mine, Dr. Andrew Levinson. He is a orthomolecular psychiatrist. He has a center called Vitality Health and Wellness, and you can look him up online and see how he treats patients. Both of these guys were Dan physicians. Both of these guys are very, very well trained in what is now called MAPS, which MAPS are the doctors that kind of used to be called Dan doctors, and they are the ones that are kind of, I would say they're on the cutting edge. They're looked at sometimes differently because the things that they believe in, the whole concept of redox and inflammation and allergies and all that sort of stuff, and leaky gut and all that, there is a lot of research and publication behind it, but a lot of mainstream physicians still choose to think that this is sort of crazy and out there. All of these physicians are specialists only in autism. They work, although Andrew is a psychiatrist, he has very few patients outside of autism. He does see regular patients, but he mainly focuses on autism. So that is one avenue. And another doctor who actually Andrew and David used to be partners is David Berger. David is in Tampa, and so the other side, and he's a pediatrician, and you would have to really decide. They have different styles, so go on their websites and figure out which one you prefer.
And we've had them both on the show.
Okay.
You can look at interviews for both of them on
Perfect.
the show and see they're both 2 of the most amazing people.
Absolutely.
I would love to be in the room with either one of them.
Absolutely. They're
Amazing
both extremely
people.
knowledgeable, and I think you will not go wrong. And given that you're a nurse, so you have 2 choices here. One is that you try to get your insurance to cover one or the other. The other option is just to go and pay for it privately, because given that you're a nurse, you can learn very quickly, and I think that you could probably benefit from a few meetings. Also, go back online, go look on the Autism Research Institute website. I think their URL is autism.com.
Yes.
And Steve Edelson, who is a wonderful guy who took over for an even more wonderful guy, Dr. Bernie Rimland, The Autism Research Institute is packed with research and information, and a lot of, the whole DAN movement, the biomedical movement came from Dr. Bernie Rimland's work, and from Dr. Rimland bringing together all the physicians in the world and having them meet and discuss these issues. So historically and current, all of the information that we know on the biomedical is accessible through the Autism Research Institute. I don't know if they still have their newsletter, but if you just go online, they have tons of information that you can access, tons of prior conferences that you can view, and I highly recommend that you view these when you have time, and they will be very, very useful to you in figuring out what you need to do for your child medically. You're doing the diet, that's great. Sometimes you need to do other types of diets. Some of the children react also to soy and corn. Some of the children do better on a specific carb diet, which is a different type of diet. So you may want to research that a little bit better. The person that I usually go to for dietary information is Julie Matthews. She's in San Francisco. She's also very knowledgeable. She's also been on this show. Yeah. But there's a lot of people who are fantastic with dietary information. Of course, I'm sure Andrew and David can both assist you with all of that as well. That's where you start. I think that's what you kind of work on. And then you're training yourself, and you're doing a fabulous job in terms of learning more about ABA. So let me just go in there for a minute and give you some feedback there. I would probably, to begin with, I would start with the IBT modules for parents. And then if you are in, the RBT the module for registered behavior technicians or board certified autism technicians are a little bit technical. I don't know if you need that level of technicality, because we're talking about, if you were to be the sole person doing therapy yourself, I'd say go to the RBT module right away. But I think you need to go to the parents module and then see how you feel about it. I don't think they're not basic. The parents modules are fantastic, and they get more and more and more advanced. So I would just start there, and I would go with those. They're very, very good modules. I enjoy those quite a bit. And then I think what you need to do is, if you hire a team of people, if you want to get a good ABA program going for your child, and let's say your insurance isn't covering it, and we're trying to get into Medicaid. It's an application process, but we're working on that. And I'm not sure if we actually got it approved or not. We may have. I'll have to find out. But until that happens, you can always hire a team of people and pay them minimum wage and have them trained through the RBT modules. And that way they will really learn the science of ABA and what to do. And that way you'll have a team of people, and your child is 2, and you really should be starting with somewhere, probably you want to start with like maybe 3 hours a day, 2 hours a day. I mean, you're going to have to break it up. Even if you do 3 hours a day, you're going to only be able to do half-hour segments, which are broken up. So you won't be able to get much more than that done with a 2-year-old, because 2-year-olds get tired very quickly. I generally ramp up sessions to about 40 hours by the time the child hits 3. So at 2, you could do a lot less. And when I say you're doing like 3 hours a day of ABA work, you have a team of, say, 3 people who work with you, and they rotate, right? So each of them will come for an hour a day, and what they will do is, or, one of them will take Mondays and Wednesdays, another one, however you mix up that schedule. And then they will do a 30-minute segment of time, and the 30 minutes is now will be composed of various things from skills. And there'll be things like nonverbal imitation of sounds, just basic receptive language, like giving or pointing to objects, touching objects, very, very basic things that will just start to teach your child some compliance, and just kind of, it's very important in the beginning. We always do what's called discrete trial, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to establish a connection with the child, where the child understands that I will give you an instruction, you will do the correct behavior, and then I will give you a reinforcer. That 3-segment thing is called a discrete trial. It's an antecedent behavior consequence type thing, and that's very, very important. Once that's established, the whole flow of ABA can go faster because the child then knows that a response is expected. You'll learn a lot of this stuff on IBT. I want to give you some direct feedback on some of these things. The head banging that he's doing in his car seat, for instance, and so on, is most likely not an avoidance type thing. It sounds like a sensory type of thing. And so I would try to get him a helmet because I would want to prevent the sensory feeling that he gets from banging. It could also be not just a sensory from banging, but the visual that occurs from doing this. A lot of times we don't realize that there's a visual component to some of the self-stimulatory stuff that, many of my kids will spit, and then you're thinking, oh, I wonder, if that's an oral motor type thing, and it isn't. And we found for many of the kids, they're looking at the spit as
and the colors.
It's the visual, exactly. And it's fascinating that we don't think about that. So it could also be a visual self-stimulatory type thing. And you can find out by perhaps having some sort of like a, like an iPad or something on the back of the seat in front of him, and see if he does it when he's occupied, when he's visually occupied. Yeah. So what your goal with that sort of head banging is to prevent it. You can't prevent it by just saying stop. That's not going to happen. He doesn't really, at this point, I don't know your child well enough, but I think most of the language will be more like blah, blah, blah. He's not really understanding the concepts of stop and do this and so on. So he's just enjoying the interaction, which is why he giggles or laughs or has fun with you. So the way to stop these behaviors is to prevent them, is to block them. Now, you'll either be preventing it by the helmet because he just won't get the sensation, or you'll be preventing it by keeping his visual busy with something else. Let us know how that goes. The fact that he also bangs his head when he's mad, that is a different function. So it's very, very possible. Always remember that you can have one topography of a behavior, one type of behavior like head banging, and it can have multiple functions. So it can happen when he wants the sensation, which he'll head bang backwards perhaps, or it can happen when he's angry and he'll head bang and hit something because what he's trying to do, because probably what happens is when he's done that in the past, people have backed off and left him alone. So to him, it's a way of saying, leave me alone, I don't want to deal with a demand. So that head banging is demand avoidance. He's trying to avoid whatever it is you told him to do. Now, so in that case, the response is you actually motor him through whatever it is. I think you said when he's mad and is not, I don't know what makes him mad, but whatever, if you placed a demand and that made him mad and then he head banged, that would indicate he's just trying to avoid the demand, in which case you would want to make sure he doesn't avoid it. So you would kind of motor him through it, give easier instructions so that he can do them. But I would not allow him to get away with things just by head banging. That's the important message here, because when our kids head bang and then we back off, what happens is they learn that head banging sufficiently freaked you out to leave me alone. So from here on, when I want you to not give me a demand or place a demand on me, I'm going to head bang. So what you're doing in effect is actually teaching him to increase head banging, which is definitely not something you want. So that's not good. With the issue of the meals, he is eating, and then I think what you're saying is that he cries for more food. What I think you should be doing is you should start to teach him to point to pictures of food items so that you're placing a contingency on it so that he has to request more food. So for instance, if you have a bunch of different, let's say you're giving him a meal which consists of, I don't know, chicken and peas and potatoes, and you are able to either, and I suggest you teach him actually, you have pictures that represent peas and pictures that represent potatoes and pictures that represent chicken, and it looks very similar. And you have the pictures, you could use a Polaroid, you could just teach these to him separately as a part of a program. And when he wants more of something, he has to point to it. Now, ultimately, in the long run, he'll end up having a whole array of pictures because there's certain foods, and 2-year-olds don't have a whole bunch of foods they like. They probably, having GI issues, might even be picky. But let's say you have 10 food items, you can teach him those food items and he can point to it. So this is the very beginning of communication, where he will tell you what he wants more. And because that requires him to do something, it'll be less likely that he will keep asking for more food, because there's a demand involved now. And if he's really hungry, then he will go ahead and do that. You don't try to distract. So he screams and cries, and then you distract him by being silly and singing. Being silly and singing is a fun thing, so it could be classified as a reinforcer, and it's following the screaming and crying. So human nature is, when a reinforcer follows a certain behavior, that behavior increases. So by being silly and singing with him to distract him, I know that's your goal, but what's actually happening is he will learn that in the future, if he wants you to sing and be silly, he'll cry and do all those behaviors, because you've now paired the reinforcer with that particular behavior. So whenever he does something you don't like, walk away from it. Don't reinforce it by interacting, talking to him, giving him, being silly and singing and that sort of stuff. Turn your back on it, and don't attend to it. That's called extinction, and you will learn that in the IBT modules. Finally,
it's completely contrary to what we've all been raised.
Very contrary.
I
Yes.
had to put a thing on my mirror that said reward good behavior and act like the bad behavior didn't happen.
Exactly.
Because I couldn't remember that. Because I had been trained as a person that be on your kid. They do something, don't do that, stop, don't do that. It's the complete opposite.
Total opposite.
But I put it on the mirrors in all the bathrooms so
Right.
that I would remember as often as possible, act like the bad behavior didn't happen, and other people around you will lose their minds. They'll be like, aren't you going to say something about? No, I'm not going to say something about that.
And it's so important, and it's so interesting, because you have people say that ABA has a reputation of being like abusive or too difficult. And we are the people that ignore bad behavior,
Right.
Which is really interesting for me. But and then finally, the last thing is this whole swallowing of
Yes.
water and holding
And by
it
the
in
way,
his
we
mouth.
had another a viewer who wrote in and said, oh my goodness, that's my kid. He bangs his head and he holds water in his mouth.
Okay.
So we have more than one listener.
That's interesting. So just reduce the amount of water per sip. So just give him a tiny amount of water in the cup. If he swallows it immediately, give him more. Okay. If he swishes it around, you're not giving him any more. Just that's the way to go. That's the bottom line. And eventually, this is not something you're prepared to deal with right now. Eventually, you will deal with this, because we will get him acclimated to a timer, and you will then get him to swallow within certain timer settings. I don't want to mess with it right now, because I'm not sure. I don't know enough about him. I don't know what his diet is like. Sometimes when you start dealing with food and drink, it starts to affect the variety of things the child drinks or eats. But right now, just give him very small, like tiny amounts of water, so that he, at best, he can hold one sip in his mouth.
Okay. But not make it a big deal. Not make it your whole life, minimal, no discussion about it. You just put less water in.
Exactly.
Okay, great. That was a workout.
Yeah.
That was a half of the show.
When I saw the question, and I really care about parents like this. You are the reason I'm in this field. Let me just tell you, because I'm so dedicated to people who are willing to do so much.
Yeah.
And I just want to help you as much as I possibly can. So feel free to write into us more, and we'll do the best we can.
Absolutely. We're going to take a short break, and then when we come back, we've got a question from a grandparent about a 3.5-year-old. We've got a question about a newly diagnosed 5-year-old, and then we're going to talk a little bit about summer and how to schedule a day for the summer for kids who think they want to be on the TV all the time. So stick with us. More Ask Dr. Doreen after these messages.
Hi, I'm Yvonne Johansson, and this is My Little House.
My Little House is an interactive, multisensory educational felt toy that I invented to help develop children's language skills.
I love My Little House.
I've been working as a speech therapist for over 20 years. I have spent my entire career working with young children. I work with children with language delays, and I have many children with significant cognitive disabilities and children on the autism spectrum. It has been a constant challenge finding toys that are fun, educational, and actually engage my students. In every preschool since I've been a young therapist, we carry on these felt boards. Kids love them because they're soft and they're fluffy, and there's usually these little pieces that attach to these boards because felt sticks onto felt. You bring them into the activity because they're putting a piece on the board. So it's almost kind of like magic. So then I just thought, wouldn't it be great if I could just take this one-dimensional board and make it into an actual three-dimensional toy? How cool would that be?
That's the idea behind My Little House. You can spread it out flat like a 4-panel felt board, or here's the cool part. In the blink of an eye, My Little House easily converts into a 3-dimensional reversible house.
This is the outside. This is the inside.
My Little House comes with 36 felt cutout pieces that match outlines in 8 colorful rooms. And they're felt, so they stick. Each piece inside My Little House has been placed with purpose.
For instance, in the kitchen, whole, half, under, on top, inside, big, bigger, and biggest, empty and full, circle, triangle, inside, outside.
Really cool thing, I have a nonprofit, Lecotech. They are the folks that put out the Differently Abled Guide for Toys R Us. They've been doing it for 25 years. They gave me their seal of approval as a toy that they feel is a toy with purpose, and that will make a difference. But My Little House isn't just for kids on the spectrum or with significant disorders. It's also for typically developing 2 to 5-year-olds. It's a fun toy.
Oh, this is so soft. That piece goes.
Recently, I took My Little House to the American Speech and Hearing Association convention in Philadelphia, and the response from my peers was overwhelming. Hundreds of therapists, teachers, and heads of school districts wanted to order them.
It was real validation for me that this truly is a toy that needs to get out there.
Hi, I'm Shannon Penrod. I'm a proud autism mom, I'm a former educator, and I am the host of Autism Live. And as all 3 of those things, I want to recommend to you My Little House. This is one of the smartest toys I have ever seen for teaching language to kids who have emerging language. Whether they're on the autism spectrum or completely neurotypical, it's a great, fun, reinforcing toy, but it's especially great for our kids that are on the autism spectrum because it makes learning fun and it makes it tactile. They have these felt shapes and they get to match them up. And I'm telling you, even the adults love to play with this. We loved this toy so much that we wanted to be able to bring it to you at a great discount. So right now, if you will go to www.smartfelttoys, and when you get to the coupon code, put in a-live.com, you'll get $5 off. Isn't that great? So I want to encourage you, go and get My Little House for all the kiddos in your life. Welcome back to Autism Live. We are here with Dr. Doreen Grampichet, and she's answering your questions in real time. I want to get to another question that we had come in on our Facebook as a message from a grandparent. I love it when grandparents get involved. My grandson is 3.5 years old. We've been fighting to get him therapy, but so far he gets 2 hours of speech weekly. My husband and I are taking him to a class called Kith and Kin, which is run by a teacher at the local library where the little guy can practice his social skills. The minimal amount of speech therapy has made a tremendous difference. He's now beginning to engage us on his own, and he's trying to interact with other children. How can I get the appropriate therapy for him? I feel with socialization and speech, he can catch up very quickly.
Yeah.
And I kind of wanted to link this to the next question that we had because it's about beginning and starting as well, in totally different areas. But another person wrote in and said on our live feature this morning and said, hello, we just found out that my 5-year-old is on the spectrum and we're just starting to learn about autism. He also has an auditory processing disorder and gets overstimulated by noise and sounds. His challenges are trouble tolerating no transitioning, spitting on other kids, and when he wants some space, difficulty tolerating young brother, he's tantruming. He will go to his room to calm down, but it slams his door. If we block it, his tantrum lasts longer. And but this is the part where I feel like they're connected, is where do I begin? He will go to kindergarten in the fall, and thank you very much. So very different, but about beginning.
Yes, yes. And you know, there's, I guess, 3 ways you can go about getting therapy right now. First of all...
But can we start by saying, because they're so new, that they have to get ABA?
Yes.
That has to happen.
Okay, so let's go back. Yes, okay, absolutely. The first family is trying to get speech therapy, and I'm not sure if they're clear that speech therapy is quite different from ABA. So the intervention that has been the only therapy, the only treatment that has been approved for autism is ABA, which stands for Applied Behavior Analysis. What that is very basic treatment, therapy. It looks like educational instruction, but it isn't. It falls under the realm of psychology. And what it is basically you learn, the therapists who work with the children use various techniques to modify the child's behaviors. And when I talk about modifying behaviors, the types of behaviors that we're modifying are 2 types. There's the challenging behaviors, which the second family has listed, like
spitting and tantruming.
Spitting, tantruming, etc. And those we want to reduce and get rid of ultimately. And then there's the delayed behaviors, so areas that are delayed, like no speech, no social skills, no play, no adaptive skills, whatever, and those we want to increase. And so we use these techniques in ABA to teach the child how to not engage in those challenging behaviors, and also at the same time we're trying to increase all of their skills, because the more skilled an individual becomes, the less likely they're going to use challenging behaviors to communicate. A lot of these behaviors, the majority of these challenging behaviors, are used because the child can't communicate otherwise. With our typical kids, 2 and 3-year-olds tantrum instead of using their words. What we tell them is use your words, and then they use their words, and if we can give them what they want, or if their words are useful to them, the tantrum stops. So it's really important that both of you try to get your grandchild 3.5 and your child 5-year-old involved with ABA as soon as possible.
And can I just throw in a disclaimer here too, that you might be listening and going, oh, but these kids are obviously in different skill level places.
Yes.
And a lot of times people will be told, oh, well, this child isn't high functioning enough to get ABA, or this one is too high functioning to benefit from ABA. And I wondered if you could, I know that to be total hooey.
Right.
That both of these kids, regardless of where they are skill level, what they really need is ABA, and maybe you could, briefly address
Talk about that. Absolutely. So ABA is a series of techniques. It is a subsection of psychology, and basically these techniques work with everyone. They work with you and I. An example is I have been doing this show with you for how many years now? I don't know, 4, 5 years. And so for me, the behavior of doing this show is, I give up whatever else I have to do, and I come down and I sit here and I answer questions for an hour. So there's a little bit of demand involved, or it's a task. However, for me, doing this show is not only infused with massive reinforcers for me, because I read these amazing emails that are all thankful for the help that we've given them. So it's incredibly reinforcing for me that my doing the show is like infused with all this reward for me, but also I really enjoy being with you. So it's for me a double reinforcer. So it's actually funny, because if I looked back at the last 5 years, this would be the only thing that has been a stable place in my calendar for the past 5 years. The only thing. Everything else changes, because nothing else actually has this level of reward for me, which is really interesting. So what that means is I do this show, I'm rewarded, so I'm more likely to keep doing this show. So any behavior, the whole concept of ABA is any behavior that is followed by a reinforcer increases, any behavior that is not followed by an adequate reinforcer decreases. That's all ABA is. That principle applies to individuals with autism, when we want to increase people's behavior in the workplace, marriage counseling. I mean, you name it, that principle applies to anything. So it really has nothing at all to do with the level of functioning of the child whatsoever. It's a series of protocols and practices that apply to everyone. The content of the instruction, which is really the curriculum, has to be individualized to the child. So if there's a child who has no speech, then we will work on communication probably first. Whether it's verbal or nonverbal, it's definitely going to be communication. Also, if it's a child who has a ton of challenging behaviors, we're going to be working on communication, because communication will replace challenging behavior. If it's a higher functioning child who is talking just fine, but their social behavior is odd, that's what we're going to be working on. So if it's a, the array of lessons is massive. If it's an adult, we're most likely going to be working on, things like vocational skills or daily living skills or whatever it is. So it really has to do with what are the skills that are the most important to the child's functioning, and what are the skills that the family wants, and so where should our focus be? Now, for younger children, it has been shown that if you are, let's say, 2 or 3 or 4 years old, beginning a program, and in some cases even 5, you actually have the possibility of learning everything that you're delayed on. So which would mean you have there is a possibility that you might fully recover, which means you no longer meet the criteria for a diagnosis of autism. Obviously, a diagnosis of autism requires certain deficits and certain aberrations in skills to be present. If you're young enough and you do intensive ABA, so we're talking 40 hours a week of ABA with another individual, so a therapist teaching you for 40 hours a week, then over the course of 2 to 3 years, you have a decent chance of actually catching up with other kids. At least, the research shows that at least half of the kids have that chance if they get really quality ABA. As you get older, it becomes harder and harder. Now, why is that? That's because there's more and more to teach. I always say, if I take a 2-year-old and I have 3 years, so by the time they're 5, I have a lot of time to try to teach them all the skills of a 5-year-old. But if I'm working with, let's say, a 6-year-old to start, by the time they're 9, just think about the things that I would have to teach them. It becomes impossible. There's just not enough hours in the day to be able to teach everything. So it becomes very hard for the child to catch up.
Fully. Not catch up at all, but to
Absolutely.
fully catch up.
And having said that, there's a subset of children who just take a much longer time. I've had children in therapy for 10 years, and then they ultimately catch up completely, So there are children who will go at a slower pace, but they'll keep going, and they will keep learning faster than they age. That's the key, is learning faster than your chronological age. It's like tutoring, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to tutor someone in math, they have to learn everything that all the other kids know, but they're so far behind that they're double learning, really.
Right.
So a lot of our kids, if you can kind of get them to a point where they're getting intensive services, it's like intensive tutoring. They will learn. And there is not a single child who doesn't learn. So let's just put it that way. The children learn. It's just a matter of how much they learn. And that really is, you just need to get in it, and you'll see how fast your child changes.
So for this 3.5-year-old, let's start with a 3.5-year-old its speech is making a difference for 2 hours. But if they had ABA for 40 hours a week, a lot could change, and
Massive
quickly.
changes would occur. And I would recommend for both of these children, because even though the other child is 5, I would recommend that you try to start with about 40 hours for both children, because you just don't know initially, and the second child has a lot of challenging behaviors. So when you have a lot of challenging behaviors, it becomes very important to control the child's environment. If you do, let's say, 3 hours, things, or 10 hours, whatever, the rest of those 30, the child gets a little confused because now they have rules during those 10 hours and the old rules during the rest of the time, and it becomes very difficult to get rid of these challenging behaviors. Whereas if all of their waking hours are controlled by the rules of ABA, they'll get through these behaviors a lot faster. So, you know, I want to talk about how to get a program because I don't know where you each are. Right. There's 3 different ways that you could go about this. Obviously, the preference is if you have funding. If you have funding, which means right now ABA is covered by insurance in most locations and most types of insurance. So the first thing I would do is look at my health insurance, my medical insurance, inquire about ABA and see what coverage you have. Now, if you don't know how to do that, you can contact us. Our admissions department actually will do a benefits check for you. So we will check on coverage. If you have coverage, then your life is a lot easier, and you will, depending on where you are, we can guide you on how to set up a program. If your card right now, our company has, I think, around 140 sites. So wherever you are, we might be close to you, and we might be able to just take over and start. If you engage with us, we do all of it. So we will do everything from diagnosis to end, you know, everything. We do annual testing. We'll staff your child. We'll give you a team of people. If you're doing 40 hours, you'll need 4 or 5 people working with your child at any given time to produce a full schedule. Now, if you don't have insurance, your other options are that you can hire people in your area, and you will then hire them and train them. The way to do that, you have, again, 2 ways to do that. You could employ a company like ours to train them for you and help you with getting your program started and overseeing that. That's kind of called the workshop model, or what we talk about now is remote services, is what we refer to it. Or the other option is to use the technology that we've produced. So many years ago, I realized there's a lot of parents out there who don't have funding. This was before insurance. And I wanted to make sure that families have access to all the information they need. So we produced 2 different companies. One is Institute for Behavioral Training, which we talked about earlier. Look that up. It is ibehavioraltraining.com. ibehavioraltraining.com is an online source for training in all the behavioral techniques, all the techniques of ABA. I highly recommend you, as a grandparent or parent, just acclimate yourself to that. This is very, very inexpensive. You can learn about autism and about ABA, and you can actually get fully trained as a parent. And each of these modules are, you know, like $10. And you can share it with other people who you want trained. You can have a whole 5 of you get together and watch it together and learn together. And I really recommend them. They're very well made, and they will teach you everything you need to know about ABA, honestly, because we have professional levels too. There's levels for parents, for therapists, teachers, and professionals. So there's many. You could advance quite significantly. So that is one thing. The other thing you'll need, aside from learning the techniques, is you'll need a curriculum. And for that, I recommend you go to our skills website, and that is skillsforautism.com. And you will, it starts with an assessment of your child, and this is where the difference between the children becomes apparent, because what you do is you start by answering questions about the child, and it'll take a little while to answer all the questions, and the questions are all just, can your child do this or not? Yes or no, yes or no. And you answer all these questions, and anything that your child cannot do, it'll generate a profile of all the lessons that you have to teach. So your child can't talk, okay, then, and he's, 3.5, then we have to teach him all aspects of language that a typical 3.5-year-old would do, all aspects. So you answer the assessment, and then it generates this program for you and tells you kind of how to teach each of those types of lessons. There's teaching plans, and if you are in school, it gives you IEP goals. I mean, it really gives you a comprehensive amount of information. With those two things in hand, you have a behavioral training and you have the content. You should be able to put a program together even yourself if you really infuse yourself in the IBT modules. Skills will guide you and you'll be able to put a program together. You can also get just supervision from us. We do a lot of telehealth supervision where we can help oversee your case, tell you what to do, and so on and so forth. And those are your real options. I mean, the information is out there. It's a little bit harder if you have to do it yourself. Obviously, it takes a lot of time. But I highly recommend that you get involved, because all of these issues, I mean, the 3.5-year-old who is learning really rapidly with just 2 hours, that's a really good sign and really indicates that your child has very good potential. Imagine what your child could do with 40 hours, and please do your best to get not speech therapy, but ABA, Applied Behavior Analysis. And the 5-year-old who hasn't even been diagnosed until now, what that tells me is that that child has a lot of skills already, and that the only reason they're getting a diagnosis right now is possibly because all these challenging behaviors exist. Now, challenging behaviors are not part of the autism diagnosis. They're a side effect of the autism diagnosis because the child has a hard time communicating, and they've learned, for instance, that, hey, I want some space, I'm going to throw a tantrum, and people will back off. And you might be right that he is overstimulated. A lot of our kids are overstimulated by noises and sounds. And it's funny that you said he has trouble tolerating no. A lot of kids have trouble tolerating no.
I have trouble tolerating
Everybody
no.
does. And unfortunately, we have to, sooner than later, teach our kids sometimes that they have to tolerate no. And there are techniques that you can do, that you use to get our kids to be more compliant. So please don't give up. I know it's massive. What you feel like, what you're dealing with feels like it's a lot. But it's quite doable.
And it's easy to get overwhelmed. So first of all, I just want to send you an air hug and say that this is doable. Like, I'm listening to it going, oh my gosh, that's so overwhelming.
It's so
I don't think
scary,
I could do it. But I know that I did. But how you do it is you do it one step at a time.
Definitely.
And even if you just have to today say, I'm going to do these 2 things. So today, you could go to the Institute, ibehavioraltraining.com, and just buy one module.
Yes.
I would recommend the one on compliance.
I agree.
Because all good things come with compliance, and for both of these kids, compliance would be a great thing.
I agree. And especially the second child, I just want you to really infuse yourself in IBT and learn about how to manage challenging behavior, because I don't want you to wait for kindergarten to deal with it in the fall.
No.
No one else is going to deal with this. They don't, unless you're trained in ABA, a lot of times these behaviors will go on forever. And like I'm telling you, this is a good opportunity to get involved and change these things.
Yeah.
You can make a huge dent in it just over the summer.
And waiting is the last thing you want to do.
Absolutely.
So you got to take some action today. So I would go to ibehavioraltraining.com, do the compliance training, and start watching it. That would count as 2 things: going to the website, getting it. Now, if you want to do one more thing, you could go to Skills and sign up for your free 14-day trial and just start answering questions in one of the curricular area. Don't think you're going to get the whole thing done in one day.
Right.
That's not going to happen. But I'll tell you, it's the best investment in your child to take that assessment, because you will get a snapshot of where your child is. I always say, you go to the mall and it says you are here, and then you can look at the map and go, where do I want to get from here? And as a parent, I wanted that so badly with autism. I didn't get that until we took the skills
And
assessment.
honestly, there's no other developmental assessment that's this comprehensive. It's pretty incredible. Like, it really shows you. And don't get depressed, because it's not about, oh my gosh, all the stuff he doesn't know. It's about, now that I know what he doesn't know, I can teach him.
It's a place to start. So there's those 2 things.
And that'll explain. Actually, when children have so many weaknesses, then you understand why they're so frustrated.
Yes.
Which
it
is
makes
why they're
total
having
sense.
these challenging behaviors.
And you will see, I mean, even at school, sometimes they talk about your child's expressive language and the receptive language. The first time I saw it on a graph and went, oh, he hears more of what I'm saying than what he says, I then knew how to play to his strengths.
Absolutely right.
So those are things. Unfortunately, we're out of time and we didn't get to the one. I promise that next week we will start with a question about what to do with a kid's time during the summer because they want to watch TV all the time.
Yes.
But I will tell you that we did a series last year and we were refreshing it this year about Summer Slide. And we started redoing it again last Thursday about 5 things that you can do with all kids, no matter what level they're at. You can approach it one way. So take a look at our Summer Slide series about what to do to structure their time. But we'll have you answer that as well next week. Thank you so much for everything you do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
Always
for being
a
on the
joy.
planet.
Thank you so much.
No, sincerely. And thank all of you for writing in with these great, great questions.